Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started with the presentation. I want to thank everyone for coming out this evening. My name is Matt Johnson. I am a capital project manager with the Montgomery County Department of Transportation, and we're here this evening to talk about the East Silver Spring Neighborhood Greenway project. And I want to just ask everyone's patience as we go through this hybrid meeting because still kind of new to us doing hybrid meetings. So if there are any technical difficulties, I apologize for those of you on the Zoom or those of you in person. I think we won't have any technical difficulties here inside the room, but just in case there's any difficulties on the Zoom, I do apologize. Hopefully you can hear me well. And I will note that this meeting is being recorded, so we will post a recording of this to the project webpage in a couple days once it gets captioned. Because of our technical limitations, if you've joined us on the Zoom, you won't be able to speak, we won't be able to hear your voice, but you can type your questions and comments into the Q&A feature, and we will have one of our staff here either answer that question if it's a simple question, or read that question or comment out during the question and answer period will follow the presentation. We are asking you, if you're on the Zoom, not to turn your cameras on to reduce bandwidth in the meeting. And if you're experiencing any technical issues, please message Dave Merrithew on the chat feature, and he'll see if we can help work it out through that process. Thank you. We are going to have a question and answer period at the end, so if you're here in person, please hold those questions and comments to the end, and we will get to those. Again, this is my name, Matt Johnson, Capital Project Manager with MCDOT. This is my phone number, my email. Don't worry, this will appear again at the end of the presentation, so you don't have to write it down right now. But this information is also available on the project webpage under the Contact Us tab. And I don't know why this keeps popping up, but hopefully it will stay away. So we did start with a little open house where you can kind of walk around and look at the displays and talk to the staff. We're having the presentation now. We're going to have questions and comments after that, and then we will adjourn and we will go back to having an open house format where you can chat with me and the other staff here, or look at the boards afterwards. And we do have to be out of here by 9, so we are hoping to adjourn about 8:30 so we can start breaking down, but we will stay as long as we need you to answer your questions. The goals of this meeting tonight are to introduce you to the East Silver Spring Neighborhood Greenway project and to get your feedback about potential treatments along the corridor. We also will discuss options for making the Grove Street part of the project permanent. There's a pilot treatments that were installed in 2021. We went through a lot of meetings with the community. I'm sure many of you who are here in the room or here on the Zoom were part of that process, and we want to look into which ones we should keep and how to go about doing that. So just some background on the project. This map shows the limits of the project. I'm going to kind of walk through it here. In blue, in the middle of the screen, you can see Grove Street. That's the limits of the pilot project. We are looking into ways to make that permanent. In green, we're also showing the extension of the neighborhood greenway treatments along Woodbury in the south, from Sligo down to Philadelphia Avenue, and on Bonifant and Cedar from Grove up to Wayne. And then we're also looking to include a shared use path along Sligo Avenue to connect those segments on Woodbury and the segment on Grove. And then we're also looking at greenway treatments and pedestrian facilities along Houston Street based on some feedback we got from the last round of engagement. So this is the same map. It's just showing the neighborhood greenway elements in purple and the shared use path element in green. I want to show the larger network that's being built. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the work that we've been doing in Silver Spring, but in orange, you can see the completed separated bike lanes that we have built along Spring Street, Cedar Street, along 2nd Avenue, Wayne Avenue, and also along the Cameron to Planning Place Bikeway next to Garage 2 near the old Planning Department headquarters site. In green, you'll also see the Silver Spring Green Trail, which was completed, I believe, as part of the downtown Silver Spring development. And then also at the very bottom of the screen, we have the Metropolitan Branch Trail, which will eventually connect to all the way to Union Station. Right now, the segment from Montgomery College down to the DC line has been completed, and DC is actively working on building their segment up to the Maryland line. We also have projects that are either under construction or very close to going to construction, including the Silver Spring Green Trail along the north side of Wayne Avenue, being built as part of the Purple Line project. The Capitol Crescent Trail also being built as part of the Purple Line project, which will connect Silver Spring Metro to Bethesda and on to Georgetown. And the Metropolitan Branch Trail, the segment between Silver Spring Metro and Montgomery College that is currently missing, is getting very close to going to construction, my understanding. And then in final design, we have the Fenton Street cycle track, which is getting very close to final design. We do expect to have a community meeting about that project in the near future. That will connect the north part of the CBD all the way down to through Benton Village to the Metropolitan Branch Trail And we have a few other projects that are in planning, including the Dixon Avenue separated bike lanes that will run along Dixon Avenue from Wayne Avenue down to Silver Spring Avenue. And the 13th Street Burlington Avenue project, which is about to get started. We'll have a community meeting about that in the fall, likely. That project we have funding starting July 1st for that, and that will help connect South Silver Spring to Fenton Village. So as you can see, there's a growing network of low-stress bike facilities. And I do want to point out that all of these bike projects are also about pedestrian safety. They're not just about facilitating bike movement. We also always incorporate pedestrian improvements as part of these projects to improve safety for all users. So this is a growing network. It's not just an isolated project. This is part of a larger network. Now, I've talked about the East Silver Spring Neighborhood Greenway, and those of you who've been involved in the Growth Project have probably seen this slide before and have probably heard this definition a whole bunch, but what is a neighborhood greenway, for those of you who might be new to the project? A neighborhood greenway is a street that is designed to give walking and biking priority and to reduce vehicle speed and volume. Tools used to create a neighborhood greenway include signs, pavement markings, speed countermeasures, volume management measures to discourage cut-through trips by vehicles, and also tools to create safe and convenient crossings of arterial streets for bicyclists and pedestrians. So we don't necessarily have to do all these treatments in all the places. It's a toolbox, and we use the correct tools in the correct locations, and also based on community feedback. So these are just some examples of treatments that are used in neighborhood greenways. Things like speed cushions, neighborhood traffic circles, chicanes, but also chokers, curb extensions or bump outs. We also have diversionary treatments. Now, I want to just go ahead and point out that we are not proposing any diversionary treatments as part of this project. I'm including them on this slide because you may be involved in other neighborhood greenway projects in other parts of the county. We may have diversionary treatments on those projects. We're not proposing them on this project, but those include things like having a partial closure where the street might be made one way at one end of the block. So drivers can't enter, but cyclists and pedestrians can. But the street's not fully one way. So if you have a driveway on that street, for example, you could leave your house and go away from that closure. Or a full closure where we actually do close the street, kind of make it a cul-de-sac, or a right in, right out, or we make everyone turn right and go straight across. So those are some examples, but again, we are not proposing diversionary treatments on this project. I just wanted to have the full context that those are in the toolkit for other projects. And I just want to give an overview of this project. So as I mentioned, we've seen this map before, but this just shows those connections in black at the south and north end to show this is part of a larger network that we're building that connects to other projects. So I also want to point out that these are very conceptual plans. We don't have concrete proposals for you right now because we're here to get your feedback. So we have some ideas. We've just talked about some of the treatments that are in the toolbox. The plans you see here have some conceptual ideas of where we might want to put a speed cushion or where we might want to build a bump out. But these are not concrete at this time. We want to get your feedback. We're going to come back probably in the fall with some more concrete plans that you can comment on based on the feedback that we get from this process. So keep in mind that nothing is set in stone at this point. We really are here to get your feedback. I'm going to start at the south end of the project and work my way north. And again, anything you see here, nothing's set in stone. So we would love to get your feedback on individual elements. So Woodbury Drive does have a connection to the Metropolitan Branch Trail and the future 13th Street Burlington Avenue bikeways at the south end. There's currently a small sidewalk connection from the south end of Woodbury over to the sort of big intersection of Fenton and Philadelphia and Burlington. We have a separate project. I'll show a map of it in just a minute. We have a separate project that is going to reduce the size of that intersection, improve that connection, but this is part of that connection. So it is a dead-end street for drivers, but it's not a dead-end street for pedestrians and cyclists. We're not really proposing a lot on Woodbury. It's mainly signage, things like a bike route sign that might say bike route, go this way. That way you don't get lost in the neighborhood. Or sharrows to help reinforce to drivers that, hey, cyclists are going to be here and you should watch out for them. So it's primarily wayfinding treatments. One of the things that we are considering, and we would love to get your feedback on, is the same treatment that we did at Gist Avenue to add that green circle, which we worked with the community on several years ago. I was just talking to Bob about that. I think it was before I was at DOT, but it was a couple years ago. For reference, I've been at DOT for 7 years. So if it was longer ago than that, it was before I was on the team. But we're looking at a similar kind of treatment at the big circle that is where Violet and Woodbury and Richmond come together. So that might be one option to kind of get rid of that asphalt, make it a little greener, but we want to get your feedback about it. And then I did mention that other project. This is the Fenton Street Maryland Fortune intersection project. It's basically been rolled into the larger Fenton Street cycle track project at this point. But the main goal here is to remove these high-speed right turn ramps, make the intersection a little more compact. It also allows us to put in some stormwater management features to improve our water quality in the area. And the main point that I want to mention here is the connection is going to be a shared use path connection here between Woodbury and that smaller intersection. And cyclists who want to get to the next Pelton Branch Trail or pedestrians can use that either crosswalk really, but the north crosswalk is sort of the intended crosswalk. And just for reference, north is to the right in this image. So Montgomery College is down to the left, and downtown Silver Spring is off to the right. Up on Sligo Avenue, there's currently no marked crossing of Sligo Avenue at Woodbury today. And it's a pretty stressful crossing, or could be, given the traffic volumes and speeds. And if you're a bicyclist, Sligo Avenue would be a very stressful place to ride. Now, I'll say I drove here from Rockville today, and there was a cyclist biking on Sligo Avenue, and he was trying to ride as far to the right as he could so the driver could go around it, but I really didn't feel like I wanted to pass him because it really felt very, very close. So I drove really slowly and let him go by, or let him go on, but it's a pretty stressful place for most cyclists to ride. So what we're proposing, we have two options, which you can see over on the boards here over against the wall to your right, or if you're on the Zoom, you can see that on the website. Sorry, I have to hide this again. Anytime someone joins the meeting on Zoom, that pops up again. So that's the issue. So we're proposing to build a shared use path on the art space side. That's what we call option one on those plans over there. And this would be widening the sidewalk essentially toward the art space building. So I had some discussions over here before. Just to be clear, this would not narrow Sligo Avenue. Sligo Avenue, just for cars, what you see today with one lane going one direction, one lane going the other direction, and parking, all that's going to be unchanged. That would not impact the amount of space you have. We're not narrowing the roadway. We're not removing parking with this option. And this would also include some kind of signalized crossing at Woodbury, so that people can have maybe a hawk signal, maybe a flashing beacon, some kind of signal to indicate to drivers that people want to cross here. And that would make it so that you can cross from Woodbury over to the shared use path, go a block on the shared use path, and then make a left on Grove Street, or vice versa, to continue on the Greenway. Now, there is another option, which we included just for the sake of having a discussion, because potentially that it might be a preferable option. So the northern option is shown in green on the screen here, with the crossing at Woodbury. But we also were looking at a southern option where the crossing would be at Grove Street instead. This would require removing all of the parking on the south side of Sligo Avenue between Woodbury and Grove. So I suspect the community is probably going to favor the north option rather than the south option, but we're here to hear your thoughts. And if you disagree with that, please feel free to let us know. But we're currently operating under the assumption that the north option is probably going to be the option that people like more. But again, we want to hear your thoughts. As we move on up to Grove Street, these treatments are largely already in place, but they're interim treatments. So you can see here the interim speed hump, the speed cushion here, and also the walking lane. These were never intended to be permanent. They were intended to be temporary treatments that we could use to test out things and see how it worked and see how the community liked it. And they can't stay here forever because they're not super resilient to snowplows. Like I think in Miami, these things probably could stay forever, but up here we do get snow occasionally, and the snowplows do a lot of damage to stuff that sticks out of the roadway. So we want to replace these with things that are going to be resilient and will last long term. So we're not saying that everything that's out there today has to stay. We'd love to hear your feedback about things that are working, aren't working, things you think maybe, hey, if you move this over 50 feet off the road, it would work better. If those are the kinds of comments we would love to have and get about Grove. We are planning to remove this mini roundabout, although again, if you think it should stay, we'd love to hear that too. But this really, the intersection is just a little bit too small. We wanted to try it out and see how it would work, but it really is, it's just a little too tight to make it work in this instance. And we are planning to remove this. But again, if you disagree, please feel free to let us know about that as well. And the walking lane, we are proposing to convert the walking lane to a sidewalk. In order to create additional operating space for the fire department, we are proposing to basically raise the walking lane 6 inches and also move it back about 1.5 to 2 feet. So that would take some of the grass behind the curb, but it's all land that's in the right of way. We're not proposing to acquire any land. We would use the existing county right of way. The reason we had to use these low profile barriers is that there is enough space, theoretically there's enough space for the fire access. But the issue is the fire department was concerned that if someone had like a large truck that was parked on the street, or if someone wasn't parked against the curb, they might not have quite enough space. They said, we want something mountable. Well, that means that anybody can mount it, and I'm sure you have seen cars driving it with at least 2 wheels in the walking lane. I'm sure everyone's seen that. That's not the intended way that it's supposed to work, but if it does happen, that would not happen with a 6-inch sidewalk. But we can't just raise the existing walking lane up 6 inches because then there wouldn't be enough space for the fire trucks to mount it. So we need to move it back a little bit to make it work, and that would require us to be a little bit behind the curb. So here's a picture showing existing Grove Street, and then here's a rendering showing the proposed sidewalk, which again will be pushed back about 1.5 to 2 feet. And it may vary based on what's behind the right-of-way line. So we're flexible. If there's some issue that we can't work around, a utility pole or something, we might be a little flexible in that design. We don't have a concrete design at this point. This is all conceptual. As we move on up to Bonifant Street, we are proposing on Bonifant Street to make those bump outs, the curb extensions. They're made with paint and flex posts throughout the quarter, not just Bonifant, but throughout the quarter, making those permanent. Adding speed humps, sharrows, and signage along this corridor, or upgrading it if it already exists. So here's an example of one of those paint and flex post bump outs. This is a really long crosswalk if you're walking on the south side of Bonifant Street. It used to feel really exposed. I think it still feels pretty exposed. We're looking, just for reference, we're looking east, northeast on Bonifant Street. So this is if you're walking along the south side of Bonifant going sort of towards Cedar. This is Grove on the right and Hankin sort of going off to the, toward just the middle of distance there. And it's a really long crosswalk. So building a little concrete island there, it wouldn't be an island, it would be a peninsula, but building a little concrete curb extension there that pedestrians can get there and they feel, they have an actual place to be safe from traffic, and then speed humps. Over on Cedar, one of the things that we are considering is flipping the parking over to the opposite side of the street. I know there was some debate about this years ago when the contraflow bike lane was installed. But the issue here, you can see a picture here on the left that shows existing Cedar Street. So traffic on the left side of the image here is coming toward the viewer, and the cars are parked toward the viewer. But the bicyclists between that car lane and the parking lane, they're going away from the camera, right? So if you're going in a bicycle lane, you're sort of between cars coming toward you and parked cars pointed toward you. And it can be really uncomfortable, especially when someone wants to pull in one of those parking spaces and they have to cross the bike lane. So that's not a super comfortable experience. So we have an option, and again, we want to hear from you. It's nothing set in stone. It would flip the parking to the other side. It would allow the bike lane to be against the curb. It would still be the same amount of clear width for the fire department to come through. It's just flipping the parking to the other side. And I think Dave said there's actually a little bit more curb space. We might actually be able to fit a little more parallel parking now on the opposite side of the street than is currently present. But again, we want to hear your feedback. And then finally, we get to Houston Street. Houston, we're looking at neighborhood greenway treatments here, like we have on Grove Street. One of the things that we heard from people who live on Houston Street was once the Grove Street pilot went in, they saw more traffic on Houston Street. We've heard that from a lot of people. And we did actually do counts, and that is borne out by the data. The number of cars that increased on Houston is much less than the number of cars that decreased on Grove. So it's not like that everyone who's driving on Grove suddenly started driving on Houston. A lot of that traffic did not come into the neighborhood altogether. Some of that is attributable to the pandemic. Some of it's attributable, we think, to our treatments. But be that as it may, we never set out to solve a problem on one street and move that problem to another street. So we want to look at Houston Street. One of the things we've heard is people walk to the park there. There's no sidewalk, so we want to look for the ability to put in a sidewalk along Houston Street and also traffic calming. So I'm going to quickly go through the survey results. This survey was done last year, May of 2022. If you came to our Grove Street meeting in May of 2022, you've seen all these slides before. This is not the full presentation, so if you want the full presentation, go to our webpage and look up the May 22 presentation. But this is just kind of to go through some of the data that we got from people based on stage 1, which is currently still in place. That's the pilot treatment. If we look at the bottom chart shows the top concern before we did the pilot. And the top concern by far was that there was no sidewalk / no place to walk. That was people's main concern. That has dropped down to second place, but it's much lower in the after stage 1 treatment because we have a walking lane. And now the top concern is people running stop signs. And I actually, when I came here today, did see someone run a stop sign. So we understand that's an issue. We're looking for what other kind of treatments. We think the speed humps were one of the things that we're trying to do by putting them close to the intersection was to slow people down and said, hey, I'm already going slow. I might as well come to a stop here. Maybe that's not working. Maybe we need some more enforcement. That's something we don't do. That's the county police to do that, but we are willing to work with the community to find solutions to that. We did ask people, and I show this because this is not just about Grove Street, but about the other streets in the corridor. So we asked people before we did anything and during stage 1, about their walking, biking, and driving habits. And 50% of people said they walk on Grove more than they did before we installed those treatments. About I don't know, let's say 40% or so, maybe a little more than that, about the same. And very few people walk less. Biking on Grove, about 20%, bike more, about a third, bike the same amount, and very few people bike less. And then driving, this is kind of what we expect, about a little over 25% of people drive on Grove less than they used to before we did the treatment. A lot of people driving the same amount, but it's still a reduction. And this survey was most people who live in the neighborhood. So if you're thinking about the people who are cutting through who live in like Burtonsville or Columbia or somewhere else, they're not captured in this. So they might be driving on Grove about the same, or might be driving on Grove less. We don't know about them because they weren't captured. This is mostly local residents who still did the survey. And then we also asked you about traffic calming preferences. So I'm assuming that these haven't changed a lot, but it's possible that they've changed in the last year. But the most popular thing, high visibility crosswalks. Almost everyone likes those. Speed humps, bump outs, or curb extensions, the choker, all have greater than 50% support. Mini roundabout was the only one that's in the speed management countermeasures that did not have greater than 50% support. And then all of the diversion treatments you see at the bottom, all of those were underwater. They were all had more people opposed than in favor, which is why we did not pursue stage 2. This data basically, we didn't see a big difference in speeds, is what this chart shows. We did see a big difference in speeds during the pandemic when the street had the road closed sign, but during stage 1 treatments, which are currently in place, it's pretty much marginal. We actually saw 1% increase, which is within the margin of error. However, we did see a big difference in volume. So you can see that between Thayer and Bonifant, before the pandemic, February 2020, we had 1,318 vehicles on average every day, dropped into 91. So that's a huge drop, right? It's a huge drop in traffic volumes. We did see a big drop in traffic volumes. This chart just shows the traffic volume on different streets. We have a bunch of count locations. I know it's hard to read all this, but basically if it's green, it means traffic volumes dropped. If it's red, it means traffic volumes increased. So all the Grove locations are down. Some of the east-west streets are down, but we did see increases on Houston. We saw increases on Silver Spring Avenue. The Sligo Avenue, we also saw decreases. We're trying to suss out a little bit what's the difference between the pandemic, because our first counts were before the pandemic. So our control locations down on Sligo Avenue saw a reduction of about 7%. On Grove, we saw some reductions like 43, 41%. So some of this is attributable to the pandemic, but some of it's also attributable to other factors like what we did on Grove. But because of the pandemic, we'll never really know. There are a lot of other reasons to not like a pandemic, but one of the reasons is it's screwed up my experimental data. So that's a very minor reason, but unfortunately the timing's there. So this is just to show the Grove count. So there's always been more northbound traffic on Grove than southbound traffic. The main reason is that it's because Cedar is one-way northbound, so you can't cut through southbound as easily as you can cut through northbound. So northbound traffic on the right, southbound traffic on the left. Southbound traffic, we had about 580 vehicles average daily traffic before. During the pandemic, when we had the street closed with the soft closures, it went down to 93, went back up to 329, and you can see over here Houston had an increase and then a slight decrease. It's still higher than it was before. But the increase on Houston, a lot lower than the decrease on Grove. And then we see a similar for the northbound, except that the numbers are even more dramatic, but basically the same kind of trend line there. So we're wrapping up here. I do want to mention that the walking space is very popular. We surveyed people and we asked them to agree or disagree with the statement, I like the walking lane. And 84% of people said they agreed with the statement, 8% disagreed with the statement. So it's pretty popular. We also asked people about whether we should build the sidewalk behind the curb, build the sidewalk where the walking lane currently is, or just keep the walking lane as it is. And all of those had similar levels of support. None of them stood out, none of them jumped out. They're all equally positive. People want to keep some kind of walking space. They don't seem to care a whole lot about which kind. We also asked people if they wanted to remove the walking lane, and just here, 70% of people said do not remove the walking lane. That was their preference. So clearly we want a walking space on Grove. What kind, we don't know. So next steps. Based on your feedback, our team is going to work to develop plans, more concrete plans, and we're going to come back to the community in the fall of 2023 to present those proposed treatments to you and get more feedback. So it's not that even when we present these, it's not the end of the world. At the end of the process, you can still ask for changes. So with that, we're going to move into the public comment and question and answer period. I just want to ask that everyone please be respectful of the other attendees. Give others a chance to speak by keeping your comments or questions concise. If you're here in the room and you want to ask a question, you can, or make a comment, you can raise your hand. You actually raise your hand, not click the button, but actually raise your hand. If you're on the Zoom, type your question into the question and answer field, and those will be read out by Dave. And I will make sure, I am going to repeat everyone's question because the people on the Zoom cannot hear you, they can only hear me. So I'm going to have to repeat the question. So just bear with us as we go through that. Anything you want to say about the East Silver Spring Neighborhood Greenway is fair game. We'll take any comments. But it would be helpful, particularly helpful for us, if you could think on specific elements. This is of the pilot, this should say the project. So any of the specific elements we've talked about that you like or don't like, how you feel about the stage 1 treatments that are currently in place, which ones you think should be made permanent or modified or removed, what your preferences are for the permanent walking space along Grove Street, and what issues you're seeing on the other streets, Woodbury, Sligo, Bonifant, Cedar, and Houston, that you want to tell us about, and just anything else you think we should know about the project. So we're going to move into that process. This does have my contact information on it. So please email me. My phone number is not on here, but I'm happy to give that out if anyone wants to. Looking at that earlier slide, this PowerPoint is on the webpage, so you can go look at this PowerPoint at your leisure. The comment record is going to be open for a little over 2 weeks, closing on Friday, June 16th. So if you have thoughts, you can get them in as soon as you want, but try and get them in before the June 16th. And I always put these things on Friday and say if they come in by Monday, it's okay, right? So officially June 16th, but get those in as soon as you can. And I will try and send out an email reminder to those of you who are on our email list about that comment deadline as we get closer to it. So with that, I'm going to ask if there are any questions or comments, and I see a hand right here. So yes. All right, thank you for that comment. So the comment, I'm going to read the comment for those people who are on the Zoom. The comment was, without enforcement, none of these treatments matter. That's a concise version. I think I captured that, but thank you for that comment. And we're actually absolutely happy to work with the police department on enforcement, but our goal, our side of things is to work on the engineering side. We don't have any control over enforcement. We can certainly encourage the police to come out here, but hopefully with the proper treatments, we can at least reduce that speeding and stop sign running. But you're right, without enforcement, there's only so much that we can do. I see you have a hand up here. So the comment is that the lady does not want Grove Street to be shut down to traffic, that you want to remove all of the treatments along Grove Street other than the walking lane. Is there anything that I missed there? That's the kind of succinct version. Right. Right. Yeah, so we're not proposing to do that on Woodbury, and I just want to clarify, we're not closing Grove to cars. The proposal is to still allow cars. We just want people to drive more slowly and so as I mentioned before, the Woodbury treatments are largely wayfinding. So a sign that says bike route this way. So as part of the Fenton Street project, we are installing a hawk signal and high visibility crosswalks on all 4 quadrants of the GIST Fenton Street intersection. So that is going to happen as well. So that's a different project, but yes. So in the pink hat, yes. So the comment is, this is the person who lives on Grove Street and likes most of the treatments, but is concerned that if we convert the walking lanes to a sidewalk, there won't be a place to ride bikes. I will say that bicycling on sidewalks is legal throughout Montgomery County, so you can bike on the sidewalk. That is legal. There was one point that the previous commenter made that I didn't address, which is we can't build a 1.5-foot sidewalk, not because it's not standard, but because it is not ADA accessible. Anything that the county does is required to be accessible to people with disabilities. And the minimum width for a sidewalk under ADA really is about 4 feet. I think we can do 3 feet with passing zones, but really it's 4 feet. Our county standard is to do 5 to 6 feet, depending on the context. But everything we do has to be accessible. So I just want to make a point. Before I take more questions from inside the room, I want to see if there are any questions or comments that we got from the Zoom. Dave, I'm going to let you use the microphone. Yeah, so the question is, would there be a crosswalk marked across Houston Street at Hankin? We haven't gotten to that level of detail. And that's really will probably come into our traffic division. I'm with the division of engineering. So our traffic, we don't normally mark crosswalks on minor residential streets. The stuff we've done in Grove is not what we would do normally. We did it because we were doing this pilot treatment and it's been very popular. But we also need to make sure there's a place for pedestrians to land when they cross the street. If there's not a sidewalk on the far side, we might not do that. But Houston's volumes are pretty low. So I guess the answer really is, I don't have a concrete answer at this time. We can consider it, but it's going to depend on other factors as well. We'll get some more questions from the Zoom in just a minute, but I see your hand, so go ahead. So the question is Grove Street designated as a bike for both north and southbound? And yes, it is a assigned bike route north and southbound, yeah. Right, okay. In the back, you had your hand for a while. I'll get you next, but yeah, in the back, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that comment so people know Zoom. And I do want to point out that Steve over here is also taking notes. So it's not just up to me to remember in the recording, he's also taking extensive notes. But the comment was, this person lives on Twin Holly and is generally in favor of the treatments on Grove, likes the fact that the speed humps seem to slow people down, but would like to see a marked crosswalk at Twin Holly and Grove, and maybe some speed treatments along the block between Sligo Avenue and Silver Spring Avenue. Yes, right here. So this, the comment is from someone who lives on Hankins Street, and is concerned that the bump outs that were installed, the paint and plexus bump outs are confusing, and that the main concern is that drivers aren't stopping. So, and also some question about what I was actually talking about. So what we're proposing is not to add something new, it's to make the stuff that's there permanent. So right, I get that drivers may be confused on the paint and flex posts. They're not generally confused on what a sidewalk is, right? So let's say we actually built a concrete curb, and had a little handicap ramp in there with the bumpy dome, the truncated dome to hit the warning surface. So when you cross on the sidewalk, you cross that, you go down on Grove Street, you cross the crosswalk, and then there's an actual, not an island, it's a peninsula. You actually have an end of the crosswalk, and then you can walk on the sidewalk for, I don't know, 6 or 8 feet, and then you cross Hankins Street in a separate crosswalk, right? It's not all one. If we go back to that slide where I have a picture, right, almost there. Here we go, right here. So this is all, right, it's all road. So if I were in a car, I could probably fit through here, right? I could just turn right and drive through that crosswalk, right? What I'm saying is, see this curb here? We built a curb here. We have a ramp, there's this actual sidewalk here and a little more curb back here. So it's not new stuff. It's making this permanent. So when a snowplow comes through here and knocks these flex posts down, you still actually have a refuge there because there's not flex posts there anymore. There's an actual concrete curb there, right? So it's a place for pedestrians to cross. And exposure is absolutely a big deal for pedestrians. That's what we call the length of time you're out there when you're crossing the street. So when you cross Georgia Avenue, for example, imagine you're trying to cross 6 lanes and there's no place to stop in the middle. You have to go all the way across all at one time. That's a lot of exposure. Put an island there, you cross 3 lanes, you have a place to wait, you cross 3 lanes. That's reducing the exposure. Really reducing exposure is reducing the number of lanes, reducing the width, right? We can say we have a 14-foot lane, we only need to have an 11-foot lane. We can reduce that by 3 feet, make that exposure less, makes it feel a little tighter. So it would be the same size. The question is, depending on how big it is, it's the same size. Okay, so the comment is that it's too difficult to make that right turn from Grove onto Hankin with the flex post there, and would be similarly difficult with the pedestrians, the actual curb extension. So that's the comment. So thank you. I see a hand here, and then after I click here, I'm going to go back to the Zoom. But yes, in the white shirt. Yeah. So the question is making it difficult to drive part of the purpose? And I would say the goal is not to make it difficult to drive. The goal is to make it so that when people make these turns, the engineering forces them to turn more slowly. So, right. So, for example, we have the Maryland 410 Fenton Street intersection have these high-speed turn ramps, and you can go around that turn at 40 miles an hour and not worry about slowing down at all. We know that this is a deadly design because we've seen this in other parts of the county. This is a design that intersection was built in 1960. That was all the rage back then, was making it so that you could keep moving when you were turning right. You didn't have to slow down or stop, even if they were, the red light was red. So we know that making people slow down improves yielding behavior. We've seen this over at 2nd Avenue and Spring Street. So we built a protective intersection there. Yielding behavior is much better now because drivers they're already going really slow. They have to turn more slowly, and they're much more likely to stop and yield to pedestrians. Now, I understand that on Grove, it may be a little different based on the volumes that are there because drivers are assuming, hey, I drive through here, I never see any other cars, so I don't have to stop because there's no risk of me getting hit. That's maybe part of the problem there, or maybe they don't see enough pedestrians. But the engineering treatments are designed to force people to slow down because you literally can't go that fast. That is part of one of the treatments that we can do. Not necessarily the goal here. The goal here is really to reduce the exposure, because if you're trying to walk across this big expanse of asphalt, and let's say you're walking toward the camera here, you're going to Safeway. You're walking from your house in Boston, you're going to Safeway, and someone wants to turn from Grove onto Hankin. Well, before this was installed, they could hug that curb there. They could go drive right through the space you were walking in. Right now, they have to go around the crosswalk. They can't drive through the sidewalk. So there is room, yes. So the comment was there is room, and that's right, because the crosswalk's 10 feet wide and the car is about 6 to 7 feet wide. But with a concrete island there, there would not be room. So that would eliminate the ability for people to drive down the sidewalk essentially. So that's the space. I'm going to see if we have any more questions from the Zoom, and I'm going to give Dave the mic. Thank you for that comment. We're not proposing any speed treatments on Sligo Avenue other than the crossing treatment at Woodbury or at Grove, depending on which option is taken. So there might be a hawk signal, so you have to stop when there are pedestrians crossing, but no other speed treatments are proposed currently. Although, again, if you have comments about what we're proposing, let us know if you think we're doing something wrong or something right, or we're not doing something enough. Let's take another question from the Zoom, because I don't know how you have it. Was it nothing? Okay. I think I saw your hand in the black shirt. Yes. That's option one. Yeah. So that comment was the gentleman lives on Sligo Avenue, I believe, and is in favor of option one for the shared use path, which would be building this shared use path on the north side, which is adjacent to the art space development, and to not build on the south side because removing the parking would have significant impact. So in the white shirt over here. Relative to each other, is that the question? Okay, so the question is sort of, are speed humps more effective or are chokers more effective? I would say that it depends a lot on the context. So that may sound like a cop out, but what I would say on Grove, because Grove is so slanted toward traffic in one direction as opposed to the other, chokers are essentially, the reason we installed the choker was because during the day, a lot of people leave and there's no parking on Grove, right? Everyone's at work, they drive to work, and Grove is wide open during the day. So there's nothing to, people don't have to slow down to yield to each other because there's enough room for cars to pass each other. So the idea of the choker was, we still want to have a place that makes people slow down when all the cars are gone, right? So it basically serves as a parallel parked car that's always there. The thing about Grove is because so much of the traffic is going in one direction, it doesn't have to yield to oncoming traffic as much because, like, I drove up Grove earlier today. I drove the whole length just because I got here early and I thought, I'll, check out what it's like to drive on Grove today. And I did not encounter any cars going the opposite direction, right? And I think that's pretty common, especially in certain parts of the day. So on a street like Grove, a choker is not going to be very effective because it's not going to cause people to have to yield to each other that often. Chokers are also really effective on streets that are really wide, and it makes the road feel narrower. That helps to drivers psychologically go slower. There's been a lot of studies that show the wider the road is, even the wider, like if you put the trees further back away, it just psychologically feels wider, you'll go faster. So that's part of it. So on Grove, I would say speed humps are probably more effective than chokers given how much traffic is going in one direction. I don't know if we have any pictures of it in the presentation, but there is one on Grove. It's you can't quite see it here. It's on the block between the 8400 block, which is the block between Easley and Bonifant, the northernmost block there, just past Pointer Farm. There's a couple houses there, and it's got flex posts where the parked cars are. That's the choker to make it feel narrow. So we do have one of those on Grove now. Yeah. Oh, I don't know who raised their hand first. In the mask on the aisle here. Yeah, so the comment is this is a resident of Twin Holly, really likes the idea of building a sidewalk and likes the speed treatment, thinks we should do some more speed treatments on the block between Sligo and Silver Spring, especially the first half where traffic tends to go a lot faster. They turn off at Sligo and they haven't quite gotten to the neighborhood mindset, I think is maybe what I would characterize that as. And you also said you were a little upset that we didn't continue with stage 2 of the pilot, which was to do the diversionary treatment. I will say that we kind of did stage 2 before stage 1 a little bit because of the pandemic. We did the soft closures. We did get some data there to understand what it's like. And those were just basically ask nicely signs. There was no enforcement. So it said road closed to traffic. If you drove down it, you weren't going to get a ticket, but it did actually have a very big impact on traffic volume and speed. So even though it was just asking nicely, it still did a good job. All right, right here in the plaid shirt. This gentleman lives, you say, on Easley or on Houston? I'm sorry, which one? You're on Houston Street. Okay. The gentleman lives on Houston Street and was concerned about the lack of enforcement and wants to know who does enforcement. So what I'll say is that DOT does not do enforcement. That is solely within the purview of the Montgomery County Police Department. They also manage the traffic camera program. DC does allow stop sign cameras. Those are not allowed under Maryland law. So if that's something you would like to see, that would require a legislative change. Now, I have to say, I'm a DC resident, so I can't write my legislator and ask for it, but you certainly can write your legislators and ask for that if that's something you think we should have. I can't tell you to do that. I'm just telling you that that's not allowed under state law. But enforcement, including the traffic cameras, that's done by MCPD, the Montgomery County Police Department. So we can certainly talk to them, but we're just one voice. You can always reach out to the third district, or to the traffic unit and ask for more enforcement. But what we can do is do engineering. So like I mentioned, the 2nd Avenue Spring Street intersection, where we installed treatments that literally force you to slow down. You can't turn as fast as you used to physically, right? Even if we get enforcement to come out here, there's not going to be a cop there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So we do look at enforcement as one tool, but engineering that forces someone to slow down 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is going to be more effective than a cop that might be there occasionally. It's not perfect. We can't do everything given the issues we have. And of course, there's also disagreement in the community about what is appropriate, what's not appropriate. But we don't do enforcement. I know that sounds like a cop-out kind of answer, but we don't do enforcement. That's just a fact. And I would encourage you to reach out to the 3rd district if you see an issue. And I actually saw some stop sign rings I mentioned earlier when I was down here a few minutes ago. Yes, right here. And by the way, Dave, let me know if any other questions come in. Okay, so that comment was, likes the idea of building a sidewalk, has been asked the first level for 40 years. on Grove Street. And I think you said you live on Grove Street as well, but you don't like the choker that forces people there, and you're concerned that once the tunnel gets built, there won't be a space to get around if there's a truck parked there. So it is, let me just check the time here, because I do want to give people a chance to walk around, but we can take some more questions. It is it's 8 o'clock now, so let's take questions and comments for about 10 more minutes, and then we'll let people talk to us one-on-one. Before I get the questions in the room, do we have any more questions? Okay, yeah. Take what? Do we have another one? Let's take another one. I'm trying to get through some of these. Hmm? Okay. Okay, so those two comments, just in case, because I forget that Dave is not audible on the Zoom, so he can read the text. But so for those of you on the Zoom, the two questions were: can we consider a stop sign at Grove and Sligo to stop Sligo Street traffic, Sligo Avenue traffic? That was one of the questions. The answer to that is probably going to depend on the traffic volumes. I would say that the safe crossing at Woodbury and Sligo would require traffic stop is probably the more likely scenario than it would be at Grove and Sligo, but we certainly consider it. And the second question I think was, or the second comment / question was, is this project going to have to compete with other projects for funding in the capital group program? Was that the gist of that? I think so. The answer is that this is funded through the BIPA program, which is what we call a level of effort project in the county. So we get a set amount of money every year to work on it. So it would be competing with other projects in the BIPA projects, but we are willing to fund it. This is in the work program essentially. So yes, it does compete, but it's already sort of programmed. We don't know how expensive it's going to be yet because it depends on what solutions are selected, but it's programmed. So in the hat here, yes, you. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, the request is what we call it, the term is a rolled curb. Yes. So the comment was that you generally like the treatments on Grove that have been installed. You bike on Grove, and that you're concerned that if the walking lane is converted to a sidewalk, it'll be difficult for you on the bike to get out of the way when there's oncoming traffic, and you'd like to see a rolled curb, which is essentially a curb that is not vertical, but it would be easy for a bicyclist to mount it, but it also is easy for a driver to mount it, so keep that in mind. It's a double-edged sword, so. Yes, go ahead. Right. Thank you for that comment. So the comment was to add some kind of bump out treatment, I guess, or a stop sign on Sligo to help slow down, so it makes it easier to get out of Grove onto Sligo on a bike. So thank you for that comment. I think we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more comments, and then we'll still have time to talk to us individually one-on-one. Yes, you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question is, how will we maintain all these elements? The speed humps were specifically mentioned, but how will we maintain the different elements over time? And the answer I'll give is that my division, we do the capital projects, and then we turn it over to somebody else to maintain. So I don't have the perfect answer for this, but what I would say is that we don't. I think there's this idea that we are omniscient in the county, that the moment something happens, we, the government, know about it. And what I would say is that we don't generally know about things. You live in these neighborhoods, you see these issues. You got to tell us about them. Not me, you can tell me, but tell our maintenance division. So I would strongly encourage you to call 311 whenever any of these things happen. Someone mentioned that there's a speed limit sign that got knocked down, and it's actually across the sidewalk in front of 7-Eleven on Sligo Avenue. And why haven't we fixed it? Well, I'm going to assume that we don't know about it until now. And as soon as I get done with this meeting, I'm going to email our traffic division and say, hey, can you go get out and get this fixed? And I don't want to guarantee it, but they're usually pretty good about being out within a day or 2 for a situation like this. So I would just really encourage you, whenever maintenance issues come up, assume that we don't know about it. Assume that your neighbors have not, because generally everyone else assumes someone else called 311, right? You assumed he called 311, and he assumed that you called 311, and no one actually called 311. So it's okay if we get repeat calls. In fact, it probably helps you get your thing resolved faster if a bunch of people are calling. So just whenever you see an issue, call 311. That's my advice. You had your hand up, yes. Lincoln and Rothon? This one? Yeah. Yeah, so the comment is for the curb extension at the corner of Grove and Hankin and Bonifant. If we could make it a little bit smaller so that it's easier for someone to turn from Hankin onto Grove and vice versa, and we can absolutely look at that. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So and to basically have a separate area to protect the crosswalk. So we can actually look at that. We have a software called AutoTurn that looks at the turning templates of vehicles, so we can actually see what's theoretically possible. We always assume, because it assumes every driver is perfect. We also assume a little bit of room for error, but yeah. So so I'm gonna say one last comment or question from you, and then we're gonna break out, and you can feel free to talk to us one-on-one. And for those of you on Zoom, we do have a record of all these questions and comments, so we'll keep these. If you have a question or comment that did not get addressed, I would encourage you to email me, matt.johnson@montgomerycountyMD.gov. If you are here in the room tonight and you have comments that you've written down, you can mail those to us because they have a self-addressed return envelope, but we also have a comment form in the back that Dan is holding up. So if you have filled it out and you want to return it to us today and save the post office a little bit of work, you can do that. It will also get your comments to us faster. So thank you. Yes, you had a question or comment. Yes, so that was a long comment, and I'm going to try and capture as much of it as I can. If I forget anything, I trust that you will help remind me. And I know Steve was taking notes, but so the comment I just to be succinct was to include some traffic calming on Sligo, not just in this area, but kind of throughout the length of the project. That's beyond the scope of this project, but we can certainly talk to our traffic division about that. You did mention the fact that in Maryland, you don't have the right of way when you're standing on the curb, and that is true. You don't get the right of way as a pedestrian until you put a foot in the crosswalk. In Canada, in Ontario at least, I know because I asked one about a sign that I saw there once, and I was like, "What's the deal with this sign?" And they're like, "Oh, because in Ontario, if you're standing on the sidewalk facing the crosswalk, you have the right of way. But they have a sign that says drivers have right of way, and when you see that, it's basically the American way. You have to put a foot in the crosswalk before they have to stop, standing on the time up. So that is the law in Maryland. I think that's probably the law in most states because we used to have something called the Uniform Vehicle Code. So that's probably the case in most states. I don't know all the states, but in DC and Maryland, you do actually have to put a foot in the crosswalk before you get the right of way. So that is accurate, and I can't change that, but the state legislature can. And you also were concerned about the signal timing at Fenton and Sligo, causing people to be frustrated, and they've waited a long time in the queue, and they just, when they get the green light, they just want to go, and you're concerned they want to actually stop at the crosswalk. It would vary. We would have some kind of signalization treatment, so hopefully that would help. But those are all great points. Did I miss anything in that summary? Oh, the sidewalk on the other side of Bonifant, yes. So, I mean, the sidewalk is already on the south side of Bonifant, right? We would not want to remove an existing sidewalk in most cases. And on the north side, we do have utility poles. We have large trees. I'm not saying it's impossible to put a sidewalk on the north side, but in an urban area like this, if we're putting a sidewalk on the north side, we would not be removing the south sidewalk to put the one on the north side. We'd be keeping that one and also just adding a new one. But given the utilities and the trees, we're not proposing to do that. Although, again, if you live in the neighborhood, you think we should put a sidewalk on the north side of Bonifant, we'd love to hear that. That would eliminate that risk for the people who are on that side, that people would still have to cross Bonifant to get to Grover to Hankins. So, all right, with that, that was our last comment. But if you're here in the room, we have about 15 more minutes before we need to start breaking down. So please feel free to talk to the staff. We have myself, Dan Sheridan is in the back is our design section chief with MCDOT. We also have Dave Merrihew here and Steve Zender with Stantec, they're our consultants. You can talk to any of us. We'll all be able to get comments to each other, so you don't have to talk just to me. Although if you want to, I'm certainly happy to do that, but there might be a line. I'm very popular. So, and if you're here on the Zoom, if we didn't get to your question, your comment, I'm very sorry. But we do have a record of those. We are going to save those, and we will and try and address it. If you have contact information, we'll try and address those to you. But otherwise, feel free to email me or call me. Thank you for coming out tonight, everyone.